Okay, I did it. I watched the Crow remake and oh no. Look, I assumed it was gonna be bad. We all saw the images, the Jared Letoification of Eric Draven. I figured it was gonna venture into the cringe area of edgy. And I say that as someone who was a super edgy teenager. There was like a solid chunk of time where my entire personality was Underworld and X-Men, and when you mix those things together, you kind of get the Crow. Think about it, but not too hard. But this movie, oh my god. Nothing could have prepared me for how bad so much of this was. If you ended up enjoying it, I am so happy for you, but I feel like so much of this movie is really bad, and then there's just like 2 or 3 scenes that are so good. But considering so much of this movie hinges on the romantic aspect of it, and that is the worst part, I don't really know what to do. I feel like if people decide they want to make this romantic coupling their personality similar to how they do with the Joker and Harley, it'd almost be a good thing because you'll know who to avoid. I'm mildly exaggerating on that last point, but yeah, no, the romance between these two is terrible. It feels like the creative writing project of a high schooler who just watched The Crow for the first time. I imagine it would be from someone who thought they were too good from all the other young adult stories that people in their age group were obsessed with, but then they wrote something so much worse, except this is for adults. This time, I can once again say with great pleasure, Twilight is still a better love story. This is the skin of a killer. Bella blows this out of the water. If Edward was in this situation, things would have been handled so fast. I'm not exaggerating when I say that 85% of this movie, to me, was garbage. It gets a couple neat moments sprinkled in before it hard pivots into this really cool scene before people start talking again and ruin it. Everything from the serious parts to the romantic buildup, if you could even call it that, is some of the worst dialogue I've experienced in recent memory. I know everybody likes to clown on Shyamalan and his dialogue, but oh my god, is this ever reaching some new heights with its lows. At least Shyamalan's dialogue feels like a creative choice. This is just bad. It's bad enough that almost all the interaction between Eric and Shelly is absent from the trailer, and that is like 45 minutes of this movie. Also, the poster makes it look like a pirate movie. You can't change my mind. These look like pirates.
Pirates are in this year?
He's even got his own little swashbuckling sword. But hey, you can just choose not to listen to this masterful dialogue by blocking it out with today's sponsor, Raycon. Raycon's everyday earbuds just got a massive upgrade to include active noise cancellation, meaning you can create your own protective bubble away from unsavory conversations. On top of some of my longtime favorite features like the optimized gel tips for a comfortable fit and a variety of listening modes, Raycon added in some new goodies like the quick charge function where 10 minutes of charge time gets you 90 minutes of listening time, wireless charging, and multi-point connectivity so you can swap back and forth between 2 devices at the same time. I've always loved Raycon for the in-ear comfort. I was just on a morning flight and they are always my go-to because they never get in the way of the neck pillow, and with the added noise cancellation, that means that I can just block out all those annoying airport and airplane sounds and actually catch up on some sleep. But when I'm running through the airport and need to kind of keep an eye on where my flight might be, I can swap over to awareness mode, so it's just so many options. And with the new design meant a lot of new colors that also come with these protective cases so you can mix and match to your heart's desire. So make sure to click the link in the description down below or go to buyraycon.com/Jedi to get 15% off your Raycon purchase plus free shipping. Now I know there was a lot of hate going into this movie, and while I assumed it wasn't going to be great, I wasn't angry about it the same way a lot of other people were. I liked The Crow when I was younger. I had read the comic book it was based off, but I don't think I'd seen this movie in like 15 years before watching this new one, and so I just really was willing to give it its own chance to stand on its own. I'm not coming at this as like a bitter fan. I've done that before. This is not one of those times. And I'm not saying people coming at it from like the bitter fan perspective are necessarily wrong. Obviously, there's a lot of emotions considering the circumstances and trauma around the original film resulting in the death of its lead, Brandon Lee. People had to work through their grief and guilt over his on-set death to help preserve his legacy per the family's requests, which has definitely led to some negative sentiments from the original director, who has said, "I thought the remake was a cynical cash grab. Not much cash to grab, it seems." Like, I'm not even coming at it from that standpoint. I'm coming at it from the standpoint of enjoying good movies. And this is not a good movie. Again, outside a couple scenes that I really liked, but they're just not enough to pick up the slack. I will say, in terms of the latest LIONSGATE kind of snafus between this and Borderlands, I at least enjoyed the shit show that this became. Borderlands is just boring, so I guess that's something for The Crow. And again, that's liking it after the first like 45 minutes to an hour, because that first half of this movie is so rough. But bringing it back to the basic premise of killing everyone involved. The graphic novel was the product of James O'Barr trying to deal with his guilt guilt and grief from his fiancée being killed by a drunk driver while she was headed to pick him up, realizing that it ultimately led to more anger and then having to come across for this like acceptance stage. And I feel like the movie does a good job kind of reckoning with both those aspects, the rage, the grief, and the acceptance of letting go that Obar ultimately had to go through. Now, this new movie actually takes a fairly different approach on it. There's some added supernatural elements, like him doing all this to save her soul, which I'm fine with, even though it changes the original intent of the story. It really is just the execution that it lacks in. But regardless of the approach to the story, it all hinges on whether or not Shelly and Eric's relationship is believable. And the only thing I believe in this movie is that they've chemically created an attachment to one another through shared drug use and end up murdered before they could accidentally die on their own. And outside the dialogue and general content problems, the movie is just a structural nightmare. Like I mentioned, the first half of this movie is just a total mess that just jumps back and forth trying to build up their unique take on the story, as well as trying to convince us that these two are soulmates, which I feel like they fail miserably at. Really, the only thing that worked for me here was those aforementioned action scenes, some of the music, and I don't even know if that's true. It really is just mainly Joy Division. I like them and they used it. I don't actually even feel like it was used that well. There's like an Enya needle drop, and then there's like a couple of things they would have left out from the original movie and comic that I kind of enjoyed. So there's no longer like the crow calling cars that he leaves behind when he kills people. And I personally liked that he took the time to make some gasoline art to let people know that he was coming for them. So no more of that, which is a bummer, but I think it is time to dive into some specifics, some comparisons, what they've changed, what works and what really doesn't, which means spoilers. Also, something I keep forgetting to do, and I mean to do more, just as something else to watch in theaters this weekend and weekends coming forward. Strange Darling is playing. If it is playing near you, I would recommend that one. And if you're at home, I'm pretty sure Longlegs and Oddity both just hit VOD and they're worth your time. All right, so let's dive in, starting with the setup. As mentioned, the general premise is the same. You've got lovers murdered, one comes back to avenge and set things right as a supernatural entity. Bloodbath ensues. But the approaches are very different. And look, I'm not saying that the original is not without its rough dialogue, but it just feels more like a product of its time versus fundamental issues in writing like this new one does. That original one is just such a moment of like the alt culture, and it's just all building into this aspect of society that this new movie doesn't even seem interested with trying to breach. But the original movie actually starts with the cops showing up at the scene of the attack where Eric and Shelly end up dying. They are already established lovers before cutting to Eric coming out of the ground a year later with flashbacks of their relationship, and then, you know, going on his crow, not necessarily rampage, but yeah, doing all the crow stuff. The new movie just has them meet on screen and then tries to convince us with the first half of this movie that they're in love. Now, with the original, we get those flashbacks to their relationship, so it's like these vignette moments so you can see all the things that build into why Eric loves her so much, whereas this one is just trying to give us the young adult special on 2x speed while they get high. And honestly, their drug use is something else I find kind of interesting. Maybe someone's talked about it somewhere that I've missed. I'll try to look it up in editing, but in the original and in the comic book, the people that kill them are like gang members and drug addicts. The crow even tries to convince a woman to stop doing drugs so she can go take care of her daughter better. So it's just kind of weird to make these two closer in nature to the antagonists of every media that's existed before this. Than like the people that they're based off of. I do know that in the comic, after he's the crow, he steals drugs, but it just feels very different than being like drug addicted ahead of time with Shelly. Might be a nitpick, but it did feel weird to me. There's probably a good reason why they decided to change that, and maybe I'll find it. But our movie starts with Eric narrating the pain of losing love and how you'll understand how truly alone you'll be in that scenario, while showing us flashbacks to his childhood where his horse dies getting tangled in barbed wire, which it feels very weird to me because the horse getting caught in barbed wire is part of the comic, but it's while he's on the train to Limbo that he sees this horse get tangled up, but it's supposed to tie into the guilt he feels for failing to protect Shelly before her death. The movie just feels like it uses it as a pointless nod to be like, hey, look, see, we read the graphic novel. You remember the white horse? Like, the movie doesn't really seem to try to go hard on how his rough childhood would like contribute to how he built such a strong connection with Shelly so quickly. They just kind of vaguely allude to it, so it just feels weird to me. And it almost feels like they just needed to start on Eric and just use whatever they could to do so, because more of the buildup has to do with Shelly and her friends running from this group of people who seem to want to kill them because they have video evidence of some very important man doing some very serious bad things. So when she realizes she's about to be killed probably or kidnapped, she lets herself get arrested arrested for possession to avoid being murdered, which I'd say is a fair trade. But Eric is just already so edgy and broody. Thankfully not the full Leto with the zany, wacky, obnoxious behavior. He's antisocial, self-destructive, drug addicted, not willing to take part in group therapy. Some of the tattoos are wild though. Like, I recently found my journal from high school, and this stuff puts some of what my melodramatic 14-year-old self wrote to shame, except it's permanently on his body. I guess it's H.P. Lovecraft on his back, which does kind of feel very Crow, but still. My personal favorite is the nipple eye. For why? For why? I guess to me it felt a little bit weird that he's already this kind of like broken edgelord to such extreme degrees, but somehow that does make the tattoos better. Like, if you just got the tattoos done after he got crowified, I'd have a lot more questions. Though that does kind of happen at one point, which we will get to. This movie also tries to use flashbacks the way the original movie did, but not to show us things we haven't seen, which would be useful, but to remind us of things that we literally just saw 5 minutes ago. Like, we're already seeing flashbacks to how he got scarred hands on the barbed wire, which just kind of left me thinking that like maybe the movie wasn't actually supposed to start on him narrating anything, but they were like, oh, well, we can't have a movie called The Crow start on not The Crow, so they shifted some things around. Who knows? But Shelly ends up at the same court-appointed rehab as him, and she is just instantly drawn to him, and her reasoning is art.
I thought that you were quite brilliantly broken.
I'm sorry, is this a young adult novel? I asked myself that question in my notes and it got so much worse. I think I actually wrote, what is this, a John Green novel? And that felt really mean to John Green. Again, I cannot stress enough how most of their dialogue feels like stuff I would have found profound when I was 14. But before their love can bloom, what exactly did they catch on video that is leading people to want to kill Shelly and her friends? Well, that ties into one of the biggest changes in this movie that I think actually works. It just could have been executed better. Sending people down, his soul is spared and he's been around for centuries. And one of his demonic abilities is like speaking like swish swash tongue into people's ears and just making them do whatever he wants. And that is apparently what they got on camera, him using that ability to either kill someone, have them kill themselves, or someone else kill someone else in that room. And he somehow built an entire entourage of people who are just cool with this. I think it's probably because he can make good things happen for them in exchange, or at least provide them with a lot of wealth and maybe just make these like mini devil deals. I'm not fully clear. We'll get some clarification down the line. But yeah, that is why she's being hunted down and why her friends are all being killed. They have video proof of him doing weird things which can't be exposed to the outside world because he's just this upstanding rich man who loves classical music. He's got this pianist with him for most of the movie who does start to get scared of him after a while, but she doesn't really affect the plot at all, and it made me wonder if she was introduced as some kind of like sequel purpose. Who knows? We probably never will, because I have strong doubts that this is going to get a sequel. But I do think that's an interesting change, that a supernatural anomaly is the reason that another supernatural anomaly was able to take place to correct it, but we will get there. In the comic book, it was just a random gang that stumbled upon them that killed them, and in the original movie, they change it that she was fighting some kind of eviction thing, so that's why this like criminal gang wanted them dead. So this is a pretty different take. I understand that this fundamentally changes that original intent and some of the original unintended byproducts of the creation, but I think it's worth trying something different because you're never gonna be that original thing. It already exists to do what it's doing, and you can say that it's like rude not to fully fall into that, but I'm okay with them switching it up. But while they're in rehab, Roeg's people figure out that this is where she is with the help of her mother, so they just like bust out, no struggle. The ankle monitors are just super easy to cut off with this little hidden razor thing, or I just assume that's how he got them off. Then they're just excitedly running off through the woods being super loud even though people are literally trying to kill her. Like, I'm sorry, are these supposed to be teenagers? Which brings us to the next section, their budding romance, which I find is just terrible. It is a montage of the worst type of people you know bonding over party, drugs, and sex. And for something that really just needs to focus in on them, it is a structural runaround mess, and I don't feel any more invested in their romance because I don't believe it. And because I don't believe it, I don't care when she, spoiler alert, dies. At one point, she literally tells him that he stinks, so he goes to shower, but then she's like, no. And they just start hooking up. This is some level of fantasy wish fulfillment that I just want no part in. It was really funny though. Someone behind me was like, disgusting. Ew. It's like you can't even get people on board with shirtless Bill Skarsgård. It also made no sense to me that they just went right back to the location she almost got kidnapped from originally and just start getting high and hooking up. Like, why haven't you immediately left town? They do eventually leave there and go to this weird mannequin warehouse that Eric seems to be staying in, but they're still in the same town. So yeah, it's just like 40 minutes of them bopping around from hookup to hookup, ass shot to lake swims that feel like they parallel the After movie. They will literally start are making a mixtape together. A mixtape. I made a joke about that earlier when they were in rehab, and she was like going through his writing, being like, oh my god, this would be so good to music, and here we are. I do maintain that in the original, Eric playing rooftop edgy guitar is one of the lamer aspects of it, but this still somehow manages to top it. Maybe this was an homage, best left out. It's funny, they try to make it a big part of the story, but it doesn't feel like it really is. I get that it's supposed to tie into her like not feeling like she's able to do music anymore because of something that Roeg did, but there had to be a better way. I also thought it was just really funny because she's just like mumble singing and then stops abruptly, and he's just like, why did you stop? It was so good.
When to stop, that was beautiful.
It's like she was literally just laying there mumbling, like, okay. But we do feel like the bad dialogue peaks when they're walking on a bridge, and if he left her, she'd die. No, stop that right now. It's the trucks talking.
If I left you, I'd already be dead.
No. Also, while this conversation is happening and supposed to be taken seriously, he is wearing her feathery coat that makes him vaguely look like Sully in Monsters, Inc., and I'm just supposed to take this seriously? But while talking about what would happen if he followed her in death, they wonder if angsty teenagers would make a shrine to them with white lilies when news flash, you're the angsty teenagers. The cringe is coming from inside the house. But one night while they're out partying, the guy who took the incriminating video shows up to warn her that she's still in danger because no shit. So they try to make their little escape back home, but when they get there, Roeg's people are already waiting to kill them, so he just has to watch the life leave her eyes just before he goes. Which is when we land in limbo! After a moment of him desperately trying to swim to her as she sinks down to hell, presumably. Now, I thought this was going to be their version of the skull or skeleton cowboy, but it's Kronos, which also makes sense. Either way, similar purpose to guide Eric on his journey. Kronos says that because his love for Shelly is so pure and that his soul is so restless, rather than the crows leading him to the afterlife, they'll guide him to make things right. Mostly because the cause of their deaths were due to unnatural forces on Earth and that she wasn't destined for hell, so he gets Neo pushed into a puddle back to life to kill everyone involved, which would allow he and Shelly to live again. Pretty sick deal, and right now he can't be killed. He doesn't quite know this yet, and they definitely really want to take advantage of like the upgraded effects and abilities. He gets into a fight with a dirty cop and has to push his intestines back into his body. Great times. It feels like such a blip though, because he just instantly follows a crow back to like that place where they were talking about potentially jumping off the bridge, and he follows her spirit right down back into limbo to like clarify like, oh my god, she really is dead. And then it's further explained to him that Roeg made a deal with the devil and all the people he's involved with killing go to hell in exchange for his immortality. So if Eric isn't successful in his mission, hell is exactly where Shelly will be stuck. Really driving home that as long as his love remains pure, he won't die, which just has to be foreshadowing. So we are right back to the Matrix puddle push, and he's on his way to talk to Shelly's mom, which doesn't get him much, but we will find out later that it seems like she traded her daughter's soul for wealth and success. Like Shelly talks about being made to play piano for people as a child and how it got twisted and weird and ruined it for her and affected her life down the line, which definitely ties into Roeg. I don't know if he was having her do things as a piano prodigy. I have no idea, but she also seems to have like an ID badge working at Roeg's company, so I don't know. Again, the only thing I'm 100% positive about, because it's said out loud, is that her mom sacrificed Shelly's soul for her own success. You know what? It's one thing to sacrifice your own soul for your success. It's totally different to do it to your child, and maybe that's why it wouldn't work. If you're willing to sacrifice your child, you were probably already going to hell, so that wouldn't have counted against his immortality counter, whereas Shelly was a pure soul. Eric doesn't know this though, just knows that Roeg is involved because he finds Shelly's employee ID, which leads me to the baddie that reminded me of Frozone when he's out of costume. It's definitely just the turtleneck and the jacket.
I killed you.
Yeah, you did.
I will say, unironically, that is one of the best lines of dialogue in this movie. So Eric's trying to get this guy to take him to the other people involved, but we have a little Pulp Fiction accidental murder, so he has to track them down alone, but thankfully it is barely an inconvenience. Eric always manages to get their phones that have the exact location of where he needs to go next. But this at least leads to one of the best scenes in the movie, the car fight scene, which just starts with him trying to shoot people through the window of a moving SUV, so obviously they hit him. Still such a fun scene though, like he crashes through the window, shoots some guy through the cheek, gets pushed out of the car and then run over by a semi-truck. This is our unrefined version of the Crow. It kind of feels like they really just wanted to flex the healing factor effects here. They really wanted to show us snap his fibula back in place. And again, I must clarify, they know that this is one of their best scenes because it is one of the only clips they have uploaded as a standalone thing online. For a movie that really hinges on Eric and Shelly's relationship being believable, none of those clips are available. But after hearing about this boyfriend that just won't die, Roeg obviously gets curious and goes to visit Shelly's mom himself, who tells him that Eric isn't doing this out of anger, it's love, that he loves Shelly so much that he's gonna bring her back from the dead. Which she obviously thinks is insane, but Roeg is clearly threatened by it and ultimately makes Shelly's mom kill herself. I think they wanted to be shocking, but when they showed him walking outside her building, I was instantly like, oh, is she gonna jump? And yeah. But it's back to Eric, who's now sporting the trench coat that he and Shelly found together. They give us a flashback in case you forgot that they found that trench coat when they first hooked up and were joking around with it. But, you know, that's cool. It was a whole like 20 minutes ago, so I can understand why memory might be a little foggy there. It's so dumb, but he does remember that she had a phone stored in her hiding place and sees the video that got her killed, which was Roeg making her murder someone else at the party, which I had already deduced because when she's like trying not to explain why she has a hard time playing music, we got some like flashbacks of her playing piano and him like putting a knife in front of her. And it's the same knife he had her friend Zadie kill herself with. And it horrifies him, even though he's been killing people and will continue to kill people at this point. And he knows that whatever's going on with Roeg is something really messed up. But this is absolutely set up because now his love is no longer pure and he unintentionally leads Roeg's men back to one of his friend's house, getting him killed, and then realizing that his healing powers no longer work because his love didn't stay pure. He had doubts in Shelly. And that was him blowing his one shot, though I guess he just kind of gets to go to heaven or whatever isn't limbo or hell at this point, but he offers to trade his soul for Shelly's to get her soul out. I don't think they ever actually used the term hell, but like you get the idea. It's just easier to say that. And instead of a straight trade, this is when he is further imbued with the powers of the Crow or Kronos and given the black blood to one last time set things right. So back to reality, and I actually really like this scene, like him emerging from the water after they thought he was dead and just laying people out with a shotgun. It's sick. Now he seems to have gone kind of a little bit more demented in his mind because, you know, he's got literally nothing to live for at this point. He's got one aim in life and he's not all human anymore. But then, even though her soul is literally on the line and currently suffering through a hellscape, he takes the time to finish the tattoo on his hand. See, he started getting a matching tattoo with her. She has one that says laugh now, cry later, which I think was supposed to be a nod to the decor in the original comic book and the mask that inspired the look once he becomes the Crow. And the first time he saw her tattoo, he made a joke that was like, more like cry now, cry later. So that's what his tattoo says. Incredible. Again, 14-year-olds in profound behavior. Then he starts putting some of the ink around his eyes and mouth to an Enya song. Look, sometimes conflicting music style really works, and throwing in something like Enya in a really edgy piece of media could really work, but this really isn't one of those times, and it's also not supposed to be a comedy. Yet here I am laughing. And it's all topped off with him finding his swashbuckling sword, bringing us to the opera scene. And this is the scene. This is the one. This is the one where I was like, this is so good. If the rest of the movie stays like this, I'll at least be happy. It is my favorite moment of the movie. I think they probably could have like synced the gunshot noises to the music a little bit better, but not everyone can be Edgar Wright. And I get that with an opera, that is way more challenging. But there's just so many highlights here. Like the tone of the movie completely shifts and makes me feel so bummed for the movie that we could have had if every aspect of the movie was working on this level. With so many incredible moments. Like he gets stabbed with his own sword, then shoots through his body to kill the guy behind him, and then kills the guy in front of him with the sword. They did not disappoint. It was good. I really like it. He then comes across who I assume is Roeg's like right-hand lady. And that's when people start talking again and we get a dip in the quality to the scene. She tries to make it this weird, deeper connection thing that like Eric and Vincent have so much in common that she can tell that they both hate everything inside them, but that Vincent just hides it better. As if they're trying to set up this like deep rivalry connection between the two, but I doubt it. Thankfully, the scene goes back to being badass when he cuts off who I assume is either her bodyguard or husband's head, and then her heads, and then throws them into the audience. Bravo, bellissimo. And then it's like someone remembered shit, you know, like this is all supposed to be for his soulmate and trying to save her soul like it's not supposed to be fun. So we better show her in the crowd and have him find some lilies for her. Do you remember, guys, earlier when she said that like the angsty teenagers should bring them white lilies? Manufactured emotional bullshit out of a conversation that didn't work when it happened. Oh my God. Like callbacks like that often work so well, especially in romance things or anything that they're trying to hit you emotionally, but it is just so bad here. But whatever, it is now time to confront the baddie in his lair. And this is where some of the motivations just start getting a little bit weird. Like it seems like he might just kind of want the healing abilities that Eric has, or at least not have to be in a situation where he has to offer up souls in exchange for his own immortality, and thinks he could probably get that by taking them from Eric. But the funny part is that while he's trying to like mentally mess with him, he's like, look in the mirror, look what you become. Why would she want to be with you now? But guys, he's literally the same, just like a little bit more guy liner now. I get that he's committed some mass murder now, but like it's fine. But apparently being the Crow doesn't stop him from being vulnerable to the swish swash demon voice, and so he just uses that, and Vincent seems to be taking his black blood powers into him. But before it can fully take place, Eric has one last thought of Shelly, asking him to love her harder when she's hard to love. It's like the fucking Marilyn Monroe quote. So he then mirror smashes Vincent into limbo, and we get a good old-fashioned beatdown going on here before Eric strangles him into hell and the creatures just pull him to their depths.
You have no idea what hell awaits you. I do.
Honestly, that kind of goes hard. We will allow it. I feel like they should have just let Bill have his accent in this movie. I feel like that might have been one of the bigger struggles, because so often when he's supposed to be kind of like badass and menacing, he just sounds wimpy. Because every once in a while he'll deliver a line really well, but it's always when his accent's kind of starting to peek through. Anyways, once he's drugged down, Shelly is released and comes out of the water, which is a little bit weird. Like the original story, it's supposed to be this exercise in grief and rage, and ultimately realizing that acceptance is the only thing that can be done. Or not even acceptance, that came much later for O'Barr, but it's not a movie of sacrifice. It's an impossible attempt for justice that can undo what's already happened. This is kind of just like, no, you can actually do enough to bring someone back from the dead. You just don't love people enough to have gotten the same opportunities that Eric did. But again, I'm still pretty well okay with that. I think it was an interesting direction to explore without just completely rehashing the original. It does go ultra supernatural though. Like when she gets brought back to life, it's not like she's just dropped into that present moment. She gets brought back to the night she died by a paramedic, and that paramedic ends up being Kronos, and it seems like it erases any of the effect that Vincent had.
It fought hard for you.
Like he and his employees are still all dead, and instead of them being murdered, it was an OD where she survives and he doesn't. Which just felt way too on the money, considering so many of my notes were just kind of like, oh, they just ended up murdered before they could accidentally die on their own. And the fact that the tattoo on his hand was finished lets her know that something did actually happen, and he had done something to save her. And she just doesn't really know what it was. I know some people were like, was that actually all just some weird hallucinatory dream where they both OD'd and then she's just the only one that comes out the other side? But no, I think showing the tattoo actually finished lets you know that yes, all that did happen, and we've just played with the time frame somehow. And back to him, he just seems to be in limbo now. I really thought he was going to have to get drugged right down into hell. So I don't know if it's because he ended up sending Vincent direct down that was almost like it was like a three-way trade. So now he just gets to stay as the Crow in this limbo area, almost as if he's the new Kronos. Because while the sequel seems unlikely based on the current box office projections, it definitely feels like they wanted one and left it open for one, because it's just talking about him being like, no, this was a good trade. As long as she gets to be happy and live her life, maybe our souls will meet again. I'm fine. It's enough to know she's alive. But then it ends with almost enough. So he's going to get a little bit greedy and try to go back at some point, except we probably won't ever see it. Maybe they'll release what their plans for a sequel were at some point. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Lionsgate will be like, nah, double or nothing. But yeah, that's pretty much the new Crow. Like I said, some of the changes I felt could have been very interesting. I like the idea of this supernatural antagonist, while fully understanding why some people would hate that. I thought it was an interesting direction to take it in, to just make it its own thing. But again, it just really comes down to that execution. So much of this story is bad. It is laid out poorly. The structure is handled poorly. And it's so confusing when you get those couple highlights of really exciting scenes that energy just can't translate through the rest of the movie. But I'd still probably rather watch this than Borderlands again. So we have to give it that. But yeah, let me know, and thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing, and all my other social medias are listed down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later. You have no idea what hell awaits you. I do. I watched the movie.